Good afternoon. Today is Monday, May 19th, 2025. We're here this morning for a work session, and our discussion item is
Anyone in the public who's watching this maybe hasn't had a chance to go to our annual report. We have recently published our first annual report. That story map is at this hot link that is on the page, and you can find more information on Climate Smart there. We do have 3 different action teams that are focusing on mobility issues. Today, we're focusing just on one of those, which is the alternative modes of transportation team. The other 2 teams are electric vehicle infrastructure and regional transportation, which we've given updates on along the way. They'll come back around at another time. But today, this alternative modes of transportation action team is championed by our friends at the North Front Range Metropolitan Planning Organization, who are here to give you presentation. Just as an update or a reminder, the action that this team has been focusing on is improving maintenance, connectivity, safety, and accessibility of existing and new biking and walking infrastructure. And you can see on the right-hand column the list of the numerous entities who are engaged in this conversation and in this work across our region. So many thanks to them and the hours that they put in, both within the teams at work as well as outside of that team's work and what they do every day. We do also track some measures as part of Climate Smart on our dashboard. And so what you might see on strategy number 11, which is what we're focusing on today, is this vehicle miles traveled number that we're tracking across the region. You'll see here on the left-hand column that about 75% of the tactics that are identified by this team are underway. So they're working feverishly on all of those items. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Jerome Rouser from the North Front Range MPO.
All right. Thank you, Heidi. So my name is Jerome Rouser, and I'm a transportation planner at the North Front Range MPO. Can everyone hear me all right? All right, I can try speaking up.
yeah, thank you.
All right, is that better? Yes. All right, perfect. My voice sometimes doesn't carry, so it's good to check. So for those who might not be super familiar with the MPO and what we do, we are the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for Northern Colorado. We serve 13 communities plus Larimer and Weld counties, and we lead the federal transportation planning process, and we consider all different types of transportation, including act transportation, roadway, transit, and things of that nature. And our big main plan that we work on is our regional transportation plan, which looks at our transportation system in Northern Colorado all the way out to 2050. Next slide, please. So there is a group called the Northern Colorado Bike and Ped Collaborative. We tend to call it NOCO Bike and Ped to shorten it. And this is a group that is not an MPO committee, but partners with the MPO. The group plus MPO have an agreement where MPO staff provide support for the group. Their website is housed onto our website, but they are not an MPO committee, which allows them, one, not to be bound by our MPO boundaries, so we get participation from all across the region, including from the town of Wellington, which is not part of the MPO, as well as participation from some of the counties just south of here. And the vision statement for NOCO Bike and Ped is a safe, convenient, and cost-effective bicycle and pedestrian network for all. And the goals of the group is coordination. So that is having all the agencies plus other planning partners outside of government come together to discuss our network in a space that's not associated with the MPO. This is an opportunity to coordinate on events, trails, and get advice on things, especially for smaller communities who may not have the planning staff or the expertise to really understand some of the more complicated nature of act transportation, including finding access to funding. Another one of our goals and objectives, promotion. So promoting bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, promoting bicycling, promoting programs that assist with safety. So one of the things that the group is working on is Safe Route to School. We do have a subcommittee where we're looking at Safe Route to School in the region and what things we can do to help advance those efforts in the region. in both Larimer and Weld counties. We also look at education, so that's for improved active transportation within and between communities. It also serves as a guide to active transportation planning in the region. Ultimately, we're looking for this plan to serve as a resource for our communities. At the MPO, since we do plan at the regional level, we do not go into excruciating detail since we do not have land use authority. This is ultimately used to, one, help our communities leverage funding. Many funding sources do require some sort of active transportation plan. So for communities who do not have their own plan due to size or capacity constraints, this plan can be useful to help get them eligible for additional funding for their needs. This also ensures that our regional active transportation network grows together and serves the needs of everyone in our region. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background on active transportation planning that we've done at the regional level at the MPO. Our first plan was in 2013. That was the regional bicycle plan. So this plan only looked at bicycling. We did not expand out into pedestrians quite yet. And this served as a consolidated summary of the existing bicycle infrastructure, data, and design standards. As part of the planning efforts, we look at the socioeconomic status of residents and see what their access is to active transportation. And as part of this plan, we identified 12 regional bicycle corridors. And all 12 of these corridors still continue today with minor changes with each planning update. So in 2016, we adopted our second plan, which became the non-motorized plan, which included everything the bicycle plan did, but also included pedestrians. So we expanded out to include pedestrians and also expanded our regional active transportation corridors with pedestrians in mind. Next slide, please. So then our most current adopted plan is the 2021 Regional Active Transportation Plan. And this was an update of the two previous plans. And what we did in this plan was expand our corridor visions. So in this plan, and we'll go into this a little bit more detail down the line, we outline each of our corridors and we get very detailed into it. So we split out the corridors by section and look at it section by section to help guide the development of the corridor to ensure that it's consistent across and between jurisdictions. And then we are currently developing our next iteration of the Active Transportation Plan, the 2025 Active Transportation Plan. We are anticipating that will be adopted in Q4 2025. And some major changes include the possibility of expanding and even possibly adding a new corridor. That is yet to be approved by our planning council, so TBD on that, but that is something that we have began working on. We'll be bringing to council here shortly. So a little bit more detail on our regional active transportation corridors. These serve as a network of low-stress active transportation facilities between communities. It is a mix of on- and off-street facilities. They are mostly off-street, but we do have some sections that are combined, so that means that it either swerves on and off the street, or that could be a wide sidewalk that is connected to the street. And we do have some that are on the roadway. And these corridors are meant to serve as the spine of our regional active transportation network. We do anticipate that local communities will build off of these corridors to provide connections onto the regional network, as well as connections between communities. And we intend these to be used for all different types of active transportation trips. We do not differentiate between recreational trips versus commuting trips. And we anticipate that they'll be built out by 2045. And that is built off the assumption that there are no additional corridors. If there are additional corridors are added, that date may change. So this map is to show the different facilities along the corridor. So as we can see, most of our facilities are completely off-road. We find that bicyclists and pedestrians feel most comfortable when they are not by the road. The road is a major cause of stress and concern for riders, and it makes riders feel incredibly unsafe. So we try our best to have these be off-street, but sometimes that's not possible due to right-of-way and space constraints. Next slide, please. So one thing that we do in our active transportation plans are regional active transportation corridor visions. So these visions include trail crossing needs. So what that looks like is we assign each major crossing of a major road a number, 1 through 4, and that determines the type of crossing it needs to be. So level 1 crossing could be at grade, a simple crosswalk, all the way down to level 4, which is separated, whether that be an underpass or an overpass, and different interventions in between. Some of those other interventions include rapid flashing beacons. So those are those signs that you see that you press a button, it flashes. It can include a raised crosswalk, which makes a crosswalk much more visible for vehicles. It also, vehicles feel the crosswalk when they cross over it, because it serves also as a speed bump in some ways. It's not intended to be a speed bump, but it does remind the driver that the crosswalk is there since it is elevated. We also determine strategic local connections, and what these are connections that tie into strategic locations within the community. So for example, a corridor in Fort Collins, one of the strategic local connections could be to downtown, and the goal of these connections is to get riders onto the corridors. And we do identify these as our plan, and when they are identified, that means they are eligible for certain federal funding that we do distribute, including our transportation alternatives funding. In this plan, we also identify preferred alignments and alternate alignments. The alternate alignments, they are meant to serve. So with the alternate alignments, we outline those in case something happens where we cannot build on the proposed alignment. Sometimes things pop up, including a major development, issues with funding. Sometimes there can be concerns with landowners not being able to acquire property, or the alternate alignment might be a little bit easier to flesh out. And then we also identify corridor narratives and conditions. And we get rather specific in these. So we split out the corridor section by section, and then we look at where do those sections go, what is near those sections. We incorporate information we find in all of our local plans, as well as information we get from conversations that we have had with our local planning partners. And in these narratives, we identify the status, the facility type. So is it separated? Is it on the road? We also identify the jurisdiction for that section. Who is responsible for building it out? Who is responsible for maintenance? And then we describe the section. So that can include major destinations along the corridor, so major schools, universities, hospitals, major job centers, and also other recreational locations that people want to go to. So major parks, connections to other trails, things of that nature. We also identify the key local connections to that section, as well as the crossing needs, and we identify by the crossing level in the major corridor. Next slide, please.
Jerome, can I ask a question?
Of course.
real quick? So when we're talking about the alternate transportation funding, I feel like the current administration, at least at the federal level, is not interested in funding particularly bike infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yes, that's from my recollection. That'd be my understanding.
Okay. So do we, are we identifying other sources of funding, or are we, kind of, when we're doing this work, we talking to communities about what that might look like in the future to try to fund some of these bigger projects?
Yes, we have begun having those conversations, and that is something I'll be looking into with the plan, updating the funding section to reflect the current realities. Okay. We will also be keeping an eye out on other updates to funding, especially as we enter reauthorizing transportation funding at the federal level. I believe that reauthorization will have to happen in 2026 or 2027. So when we get that bill from Congress and it gets passed, we'll get more of a sense of what major changes can be done to the funding programs. I have not heard any major updates concerning the transportation alternatives funding, and funding that are bike ped specific, but we just don't know until we hear from the administration.
Sure. So maybe PED projects might be more palatable than bike projects in the short term at least. Okay. And then with SB 2530, with the mode choice bill, does it call for the MPOs to sort of, it initially was calling for communities to sort of map out their gaps in some of the, is that work being pushed to the MPO level, and is that something that becomes part of the plan? Because I think they want to identify sort of gaps in sidewalks and gaps in, bike infrastructure and stuff like that. And do we know anything about what that might look like yet? Or is that pretty, because it's so newly adopted that we're unsure?
So on Senate Bill 2530, what we do know with the MPOs is that we do have to do an analysis on the gaps. So we do need to go out to our member communities to get all of their bike ped projects as well as their transit projects and put in inventory and then send that to the state. We're not sure exactly what that would look like in terms of inventories. All we know is that we need to get those projects from our local communities, which fortunately for the MPO, that is something that we already do with our plan updates. But we are waiting to hear from the state on more details on what exactly they're looking for with that bill, as well as how detailed it should be. There are some suggestions for local communities. They were requirements in the original bill, but they have been amended out to be suggestions. And some of those include setting some sort of performance metrics for active transportation, but as far as I know, those are not required. But the MPO, we will be keeping an eye out for additional guidance on that bill as CDOT begins to look into exactly what is needed from both the state and MPO planning partners.
Okay. So it looks like maybe we're in a good space in that we've already do a lot of this work and our communities are sort of up on it. Maybe smaller communities may need more help. I don't know what that looks like, but okay. Well, thank you. Any other questions for Jerome or Heidi? Okay. We'll keep going then.
Next slide, please. So this slide is just to show some of the mapping that we do for the plan. So for each corridor, we have the existing conditions map as well as future needs map. And as you can see, these get rather detailed. So in here, you can see that we split it out section by section. And these sections are not necessarily even in terms of mileage, but we do try to have them be logical. So some sections are smaller because they're in more dense areas where there are more crossing needs and more destinations. And then we have wider sections for the portions that are going through areas that are not quite developed. Next slide, please. And then on the future needs map, this is where we outline our crossing needs as well as the strategic local connections, so that those maroon lines, those are our local connections. And we provide this as a visual to show, one, where they are, and two, just how connected our region is. Especially as our region continues to develop, it is developing inward. So we are anticipating out through 2050 that most of the growth in the region will be in the central part near the I-25 US 34 interchange near Centera. So as the region continues to develop and grow, we are looking to ensure that our active transportation network grows with the region, so that it is there when the people are here. Next slide, please. So for this next section, I'll be going through each of the corridors that go through Larimer County, which is most of them. So in these, I outlined the jurisdictions just within Larimer County, and then the total length, population, jobs is along the whole corridor. I felt it was important to show even the Weld County size for population, just to show, one, how connected we are, and two, reflecting on the fact that many people will be traveling across counties, across county boundaries, especially as we see more prevalence of e-bikes, which can allow for even longer distance trips. So the first corridor that impacts Larimer County is the Little Thompson River Trail. And that goes through unincorporated Larimer County as well as the town of Berthoud. So the 2020 length is about 2.5 miles, and full build out, we're anticipating it to be about 20.5 miles. This corridor is completely separated facilities, so once it's fully built out, it will not be on the street at all, or if it is, it'll be for very small sections. So in terms of population, in the 2020 population within half a mile of this corridor is about 9,000, and we're anticipating that to grow out to 35,600. So a lot of growth along this corridor. And a little bit of spoiler for future, this is not even one of the larger corridors. We're going to see much more explosive growth on some other corridors.
So a quick question about that corridor. There is some controversy right now happening in Berthoud, whether there'll be annexation and whether some of that will be kept open space to make a trail. And then there's like a development. And so I'm curious, this is in Larimer County, but everywhere is Larimer County. Everywhere is somewhere in Larimer County. But when we have those connections and you connect it to downtown or Berthoud, where folks would probably want to come down from downtown and the schools are in that downtown area, how do we connect how do you work with municipalities to connect them with those corridors where you're going to see this growth? So they can also go downtown and connect those. I just came back from a lot of different areas where the infrastructure and mobility choices just make us look way behind. And so I'm curious how we connect those so folks can travel safely without cars everywhere to get to these different areas, especially in that area that's growing so fast.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we do is during plan updates, we meet with our local agencies. So I met with the town of Berthoud to discuss all the corridors within the region, and we did have quite a bit of extensive conversation about this corridor, especially with some of the controversies around that. So that's one way we do it. The second way we do it is through updates to NOCO Bike and Ped. A limitation with that is that's dependent on who's at the table. So if, for example, the town of Berthoud is not at that particular meeting, then we do not necessarily get an update. Another thing we do is, depending on need, we can also go to our technical advisory committee to discuss the corridors. And that's something that we do each major planning process, including with our regional transportation plan. We do take another look at these corridors for that plan as well, but we do not go into as much detail since that is already a behemoth of a plan in itself.
Thank you.
But that's something that we'll continue to think about once the plan's adopted, is how can we continue to have conversations with municipalities to ensure that these corridors are built out.
Great. So kind of getting way ahead of upstream, literally up the trail before these get built out. And it's, I'm gratified to hear that there's no silos there and you're trying to communicate that to help with better planning so that, for all the reasons. So I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Thank you. And then along this corridor in 2020, there were a little over 3,000 jobs. We are anticipating by 2045 for there to be a little under 13,000 jobs. And I will note where we're getting these numbers from. We are getting these numbers from our regional transportation demand, wrong acronym. Our regional transportation, what is it called? Our travel model, our model. That is not its formal name. I'll remember it at 2 a.m. in the dead of night. But we get that from.
A lot of acronyms in this space, yes.
Yeah, and many of them are very, very close. But we get these numbers from our travel model, which is supported by data received from the Department of Local Affairs and our State Demography Office, as well as U.S. Census numbers. And then 2045, that year was chosen because that was the date for the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan. And the 2021 Act Transportation Plan is the Act Transportation component of that plan. So for our upcoming plan, we will be looking out to 2050 to reflect the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. So expect these numbers to get even larger. All right, next slide, please. So the next corridor we'll be looking at is our Big Thompson River Trail. So jurisdictions within Larimer County is unincorporated Larimer County as well as the city of Loveland. And I believe it clips a little bit into Johnstown, but I believe that is when it is in Weld County. So in 2020, about 2.5 miles were built out. We are anticipating this corridor to be 27 miles in total. So we still have quite a ways to go before the completion of this corridor. So the population within half a mile in 2020 was a little under 16,000, and we're anticipating that to get up to 48,000 by 2045. So another corridor where we are anticipating a large amount of growth, particularly in that central part near US 34 in East Loveland and West Johnstown. And then with jobs, we see about 13,630 jobs in 2020, and we're expecting that to grow to 29,245 in 2050. And this corridor also has the opportunity to extend westward out of the MPO up Big Thompson Canyon along with the US 34 bypass trail. But that is outside the MPO's jurisdiction, so that is not something that we plan for, but we do note when corridors do enter and leave the region. All right, so this next corridor is RATC number 4, which is in the Great Western Trail. So this is another corridor that will go through the city of Loveland primarily. So the total length in 2020 is 10 miles, and all of that is on the Weld County side between the towns of Eaton to Windsor. We do anticipate this corridor will continue into Loveland and connect into the corridors within Loveland. You will see as we go through this presentation, Loveland is a big connection point for our regional transportation corridors. So the total length we're anticipating by 2045 is 27 miles, which is pretty common. Many of these corridors are between 25 and 27 miles. So this is another one where we're going to see a lot of population growth. So in 2020, the population was 25,766, and we're anticipating by 2045 for that to almost double to 99,267. And once again, we're expecting most of that growth to be in the central part of the region. You're going to hear a theme throughout here, that central part is very key to our future growth and development. And then jobs, in 2020, there were about 6,696 jobs. In 2045, we're expecting that to grow significantly out to 53,944. You could probably guess where we're anticipating those jobs to go. But this is a corridor where we're going to see a lot of growth and the potential for high demand, especially as a corridor that connects out east to our communities in Weld County. All right, next slide, please. So this corridor, this is one of our few corridors that is mostly on street through protected bike lanes or shared use paths along the roadway. So this jurisdiction goes through the city of Loveland, as well as barely clips into Fort Collins, just in the southern parts. I believe it goes to the Fort Collins growth management area, so they do have portions they're responsible for. The total length for this corridor is 20 miles in 2020. By 2045, we anticipate to be 21 miles. So this corridor is mostly completed. There are still some sections that need to be completed, as well as some sections that we mark as temporary. So we're anticipating additional construction along the way in certain sections of the corridor to be, I believe, to separate a little bit more from the roadway. But there is some corridor built out for people to use today. So population along this in 2020 was 32,454. And this one is also going to, I'm not going to try to do much math, almost double by 2045 to 62,619. And then this is another one where we're seeing quite a few more jobs along the corridor. So in 2020, that's about 11,154 jobs. In 2045, we're anticipating that to go out to 25,311 jobs. All right, next slide, please. So this is the big trail in our network, the most well-known, the longest, and definitely the spine of our network, the Poudre River Trail. So this goes through unincorporated Larimer County, Fort Collins, Timnath, and Windsor, and will eventually go all the way out to the confluence of the South Platte River and Poudre River east of Greeley. The total length in 2020 is 41 miles, and by 2045, we anticipate this to be 51 miles. So this is by far our longest corridor, and this corridor is almost complete. We're very, very excited about that. So the population along this corridor will double. Again, we are seeing another trend here. So the 2020 population is 51,883. We're anticipating that to go out. We're anticipating that to be 101,768. So a lot of growth along this corridor. And then with jobs, similar story. We're anticipating that will double as well. So in 2020, there are 47,124 jobs. By 2045, we're anticipating 82,407. Next slide, please. So this is RATC 7, which is the Front Range Trail West. So this is a corridor that is statewide. So this one does extend north out of our MPO boundary up to the town of Wellington, and then would continue north in, I believe, into Wyoming. And then this one also continues south into Boulder County. So this goes through Fort Collins, Loveland, and Berthoud. In 2020, about 20 miles of it was completed, and we are anticipating it to be 47 miles in its entirety. So we are about halfway there on this corridor. So population within half a mile in 2020 is 49,638. 2045, 89,464. So another, I'm going to sound like a broken clock, another corridor we were seeing a lot of growth in population. And then in jobs, in 2020, we have 32,613. In 2045, 50,230. Again, similar story. We're anticipating a lot of job growth around this corridor.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
And Zach's here, so I see that it's crossing the Boulder County line. Is that west of Berthoud, near that recent acquisition and where we traveled with Noco Places the other day? Is that the trail connection that's there? Is that what we're looking at? And then that's probably a few years in the future. And so that, is that outside or inside the MPO jurisdiction? I'm just curious, just because I know where that area is, and I know we're already having some partnerships with DNR spaces between Boulder County and Larimer County, but I'm trying to understand the MPO connection.
Yeah, I can answer that one. I'm Zach Wiebe with the Natural Resources Department. And yes, you're right that it is west of Berthoud, this alignment. And I believe, and I'll look to Jerome for this one, but the Boulder County line is the MPO boundary.
I believe so in this section.
And I'll add to that too that the Colorado Front Range Trail is also a statewide vision to connect all the way, as the name suggests, from Wyoming to New Mexico along the Front Range. And in that plan, which hasn't been updated in a while, there are quite a number of alternate alignments. And in our region, it's the same. There's western alignments and eastern alignments. And so sometimes the nomenclature is a little bit different, including in this plan versus even our plan. So yeah, there's a few different places where after it's all built out, it'll almost certainly be one of these alternate routes for the Front Range Trail.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Collis, any questions? Okay. Jerome, just one question as we're going through these. Are all these trails paved or not?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I believe the ultimate goal is for them to be paved. The Great Western Trail currently is not paved, but I do know that is anticipated to be paved. I believe the Larimer County portion will be paved.
And then are e-bikes and e-scooters allowed on all these trails?
That depends on the jurisdiction. I do know in Fort Collins they're allowed. I believe they're allowed in Loveland as well. They are not.
Well, I'm not sure on all Loveland trails, but I know they're not allowed on certain trails for us, so I was curious. That's why I should say, sorry.
It ultimately depends on the trail. So many of the paved trails, I believe e-bikes are allowed. Non-paved trails is where we begin to see e-bikes not being allowed. But that space is changing quite a bit as we get more and more information on e-bikes and more people purchase e-bikes. They become more prevalent. That is something that I'm anticipating there to be changes
Yeah.
down the line as we see more and more e-bikes get on the network.
Yeah, I mean, especially for what are in essence commuter trails with a lot of jobs on there. I mean, and I don't know what that looks like to have conversations at those municipal levels around the value of that. There again, I understand, on a recreational trail, or an unpaved trail, that there might be other, other concerns but as far as like commuter type trails, I mean, it certainly makes sense at this point to, I think that some people are concerned about speed and safety and, there's people that can ride their bikes pretty fast, so,
No,
not me.
absolutely.
Also, and so, I think that's something, those are conversations that, will be good to have to make sure that that's a possibility.
Absolutely.
And I might add, if helpful, that from my understanding, the most prevalent regulation is that most municipalities and communities and Larimer County allow Class 1 and 2 e-bikes, but on paved trails, but not Class 3. There are some differences here and there, but that's the most common regulation. And as Jerome mentioned, natural surface trails, there's a higher degree of variability in the regulations.
Sure, and I don't know with the class 3, maybe they get to higher speeds, I think, is that the
Exactly
the
right.
concern?
Yep.
Okay.
And this is where groups like NOCO Back and Ped are very useful. We've had discussions about e-bikes and trails and NOCO Back and Ped, and that's where the coordination education piece come in. These are one of the topics where we go in and we're able to discuss what does your community do with this, pros and cons, things of that nature, to be able to coordinate and lean on each other's expertise for the betterment for all of us. So that's a good kind of real life example of what NOCO by Caped can do. And that's definitely something that we can look into more with that group, especially as we continue to see these trails get built out.
Yeah, I think it's just important to kind of keep up with what the technology looks like and what people's needs are. And, I know that in contemplating that when I was on Fort Collins City Council, it was sort of like, we want to make sure that everybody can enjoy these trails. And if you have mobility issues and, or there again, it's a lot cheaper to buy an e-bike than it is to buy a car, right? And it's better for the planet. So, like, how do we create policies that encourage that and yet keep those trails safe? So I'm glad that NOCO Bike and Ped is involved with those discussions.
Absolutely. All right, next slide, please. So I'll say this is one of the corridors that may be changing depending on Planning Council. So the jurisdictions within Larimer County, similar to RITC 7, is Fort Collins, Loveland, and Berthoud. The total length in 2020 is 13 miles. By 2045, we are anticipating 23.8 miles, assuming there is no extension. If there is an extension, that number will get higher. So population within half a mile is 44,962 for 2020, and then 2045, we're anticipating that to go out to 92,000. And then jobs within half a mile is 47,659, and then by 2045, 78,535. And we are looking for this corridor, the possibility of extending it north into Wellington. And that has been supported by City of Fort Collins, Larimer County staff, as well as the town of Wellington. Next step is getting our planning council to agree or getting confirmation from Planning Council that is in alignment with their vision for the region as well. So these numbers might change drastically depending on how that goes. I do know that northern portion of not Larimer County, Fort Collins, is also anticipated to get some significant growth, so the population job numbers could change significantly depending on that extension. All right. So this one is Johnstown to Timnath, very creatively named. And the jurisdictions are Johnstown and Timnath. And this one follows the Weldon-Larimer County line. So the length in 2020 is 4 miles, and 2045 we're anticipating it to be 21 miles. So population within half a mile, 2020 was 12,596, and then 2045, 60,187. So this is one of the corridors we're seeing some of the most growth. I'll leave you to guess where that growth is. And then jobs, we are seeing less growth. So 2020, a little under 2,000, and then 2045, 8,407. So this corridor, not a lot of job growth, but a lot of population growth. And we do anticipate, I hope I don't need that. We do anticipate that this corridor will be used mostly by commuters to connect to other corridors to get to the jobs. All right, so another big one. This has been a big topic of discussion at the MPO, the US 34 parallel corridor. So the jurisdiction within Larimer County is Johnstown and Loveland. In 2020, we had about 5 miles completed. 2045, we're anticipating this to be around 25 miles. This one has our largest population growth by far. So 2020, the population was 27,949. 2045, we anticipate this to be 140,423. Don't want to do mental math again, but that is a significant growth, which signals to us that this trail is a priority in getting complete before a lot of that growth comes in, before it becomes much more difficult to develop it out. And we see a similar story with our jobs along this corridor. So jobs in half a mile, 2020, 45,707, 2045, 102,672. So this corridor is definitely a priority for the MPO, since it is along such a key corridor in our region and a corridor that our planning council has identified as a priority for the region.
Is there a lot of right-of-way access that has to be done? I mean, it seems like it has to be done fairly quickly, because it's getting built out so quickly. Is there concerns about that, or is that being planned into the developments? Do we have a sense of that?
So from what I'm hearing on the Weld County side, many of those communities are anticipating how to be part of development. And that's on their radar as well, that this land is very, very valuable. And then on the Larimer County side, this corridor goes through pretty developed areas. So once it crosses county line, that's Centera, that's because it crosses at the Centera Mobility Hub, that's downtown Loveland. And that's part of the sections that are already completed or would be on the roadway. So I don't know if there are major right-of-way concerns on Larimer County side. I would have to double check to be sure, but just based off of where it's going, I'm not sure. Where there could be right-of-way issues is as the corridor goes west of Loveland and begins going into Big Thompson Canyon, which we don't mark this corridor as going up there quite yet, but it can. It currently ends at the MPO boundary. So that is a corridor that, if the county decides, can continue up into Estes Park, but that would be outside the MPO's jurisdiction. All right, next slide, please. So this corridor is the Carter Lake Horsetooth Foothills. So this corridor is unique because it is only in unincorporated Larimer County. That's the only jurisdiction. This is also only on a roadway. I cannot remember the roadway off the top of my head. So in 2020, about a mile of it was built out. We're anticipating this to be a 31-mile corridor. So this corridor does not have significant population and jobs along the way. So the population in 2020 is 944. We're anticipating that to be 6,905 by 2045. And then for jobs, 916 jobs on the corridor. And then for 2045, 1,646. This corridor, we anticipate is mostly be used for recreation, since it does go by Horseshoe Reservoir as well as Carter Lake and other trails and outdoor activities along the way. So next steps, we will continue to work with NOCO back and PED to determine appropriate metrics. In those discussions, we discussed, of course, vehicle miles traveled, which is a very useful metric when looking at transportation and its impacts on the environment. But in terms of act transportation, it can be useful, but with VMT, that could be impacted by multiple different things. So we were looking at other metrics, including miles of trail built. We also were looking at using count data to see how many people use the trails and how that can be used in our metrics. I've also, next time we discuss NOCO back in PED, we'll be proposing that we look into looking at some safety data and some safety metrics, because unfortunately, the trends for safety data when it comes to bike ped crashes and nationwide, statewide, and region-wide is going in the wrong direction. And the MPO, we made it a priority. We made safety a major priority and trying to get those numbers to zero. So looking into safety data to ensure that our network is safe for all users, regardless of how comfortable they are riding a bicycle. We'll also be looking into things like bike parking, things of that nature, to ensure that people have places to leave their bikes when they do ride them. We will also continue to track RATC construction progress. We will discuss data needs and potential bicycle pedestrian counter use and how those counters can be used to, one, help us leverage funding, because when it comes to applying for grants, the more data you have, the better. So what can we do to help get more dollars up here to build out our network? And then continuing to collaborate with NOCO back in PED to improve and expand on our network. So that not only includes our regional active transportation corridors, but that also includes some of our local trail networks. One of the services NOCO back in PED offers is feedback on plans. So we have had communities come present their draft plans to the group, and we've given feedback on its contents and suggestions on how it can be improved and some things that they might want to consider. So that also ties into the coordination piece for NOCO back in PED. Yeah, I think for me.
Okay. I think that's the end of the MPO's portion of the presentation. If you have questions, this would be great. The last slide that I have for you is just a advertisement for our Knowledge Break series that is available. We have several different, they're kind of like a lunch and learn session for folks to come in and hear a little bit of information on deep dives into topics just like this one. So I encourage folks to go there, but that's just my advertisement. So maybe you have some questions for our folks here.
Great, thank you. Questions? Commissioner Cafalas?
Thank you. I think I'll just ask one overarching question. And I think I now understand the vehicle miles traveled slide 6. I think that we're talking about, for example, the maximum is 2.5. It's kind of hard to read the font just a little bit. Is that 2.5 billion VMTs annually, or what is that?
That sounds right, but let me. Yes.
So, for example, in 2018, in terms of what's explained underneath metric description, the total VMTs in Larimer County, staying within the county, plus 50% going out, 50% coming from other counties, that's 2.5 billion vehicle miles traveled.
Yes.
then my overarching question is, so how do we evaluate whether all these trails are working? In other words, getting folks out of their cars and where they're able to not just recreate with bicycles, but actually commute. How do we evaluate that? How do we determine that we're making a difference in terms of VMTs and helping air quality and all the rest?
That's the $1,000,000 question.
Well, I'm hoping you have an answer, though, Jerome.
I do. So, part of that could be seeing our VMTs go down. The issue with that is we don't know if that's necessarily based off of the trails, or that could be based on some other interventions, including like additional carpooling or working from home. So that is where bicycle and pedestrian count data can be very useful. That data, we can see increases in usage. The downside to that is that takes time to accumulate, to be able to determine, there's the words that tip my tongue, determine, it's going to bother me. To be able to determine travel patterns and to see if those numbers are going up. So that would be a long-term solution. As we get more and more technology coming out, there's other data sources as well that could be useful. So there are some crowdsourcing data sources where they track by phone. So there are additional data sources out there that can help supplement bicycle and pedestrian count data. But that, I think, would be the major way to be able to determine how many people are using our trails is by going out and counting. We can also, or it could be possible to look into bicycle sales and things like that in the region. That might not tell us that they're using the system, but that at least tells us that there's interest, or that the number of bicycles out there, that's the capability. But it ultimately goes down to data and being able to get the counters and have access to the data that's out there, especially as we get more and more data sources coming online with new technologies.
No, thank you. And it's interesting, the data points regarding number of jobs within a half mile of the trail. I guess obviously the correlation there is if there are more jobs closer to these trails, that incentivizes the use of these trails or other thoroughfares for commuting purposes.
And
Yeah.
Commissioner, I'll also offer to you that the e-bike rental organizations, whether it's Spin or other organizations, are also collecting data, and there has been some effort to collaborate on the boundaries between the municipality contracts so that we can track on a more regional scale through those that are renting versus purchase. So it doesn't capture the entire breadth of the use, but when you're talking about commuters, many of them are going to be utilizing the e-bikes, and so understanding those counts are through that kind of mechanism is also something that's being looked at. Yeah.
I'd also like to note too, so while we do track population and jobs, we also look at schools and transit stops along the way as well. So those are some other, I didn't add those to the slides because it would be sensory overload. But we look at those destinations as well, because we also recognize that a big user of these trails will be students going to school. And that ties into the Safe Routes to School efforts that NOCO Back in PED is, and the MPO I don't think that's a word, but are working on.
Sure. Thank you. Commissioner Shanahan, any questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you, and sorry we got you in late, and we'll get you out a little late too. But thank you, Zach and Heidi and Jerome, for the presentation. We really appreciate it. This is great information. I think that even the education piece on where all these trails exist, I think that some folks just don't even know about that. So I think that's really great information to get out there. And can people still participate in some of the surveying you're doing, or is that all done?
So the survey for the plan is complete.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So But we're looking forward to adopting that at the MPO level at the end of the year, and there's a lot of exciting moving pieces, literally and figuratively. And so we're glad to have this information, so thank you all for coming. And it's 12:02, and we're adjourned. Thank you.